My Uncle Todd was a 45-year-old man who'd never married. He lived off of food stamps and practically smoked his life away. But my parents did everything that they could to still keep him connected with the family, even when my grandparents refused to speak of him and his oddities. He'd lived an average life for the most part. He'd been an electrician by trade, but got fired once he started acting delusional and almost fried himself to death. Back in his sane years, he used to babysit me all the time. He was a blast of an uncle. That was until she came along. I still remember the day I met Auntie Allison. I'd been to his rundown apartment in the north end of our city only a handful of times. Each time was the same. I'd get off, I'd watch hours of SpongeBob, and he'd crack up some annoying dad joke like puns. They'd pick me up around 5 p.m., and then I'd go home. This time started no different. My parents dropped me off like they do, and I bounded up those steps only to be met with an unfamiliar lady on the other end of my uncle's door. "Hello," she said, and I merely blinked at her. I couldn't keep a straight face as I took in the look of this woman. She had dyed pitch black hair and a nose ring. She was also chomping on some gum and had a gruff, slightly off-putting voice. Tattoos lined up her arms. I didn't like her. I thought she reeked of BO. "I'm your Auntie Allison." My Uncle Todd revealed himself from behind her, beckoning me in. He'd never mentioned her before. "This is Allison," he said, grabbing onto her waist. "My wife. Finally, another woman for you to talk to, am I right? Get in here." I walked through the door like I was walking on broken glass, and my eyes never wavered from Allison's gaze. There was something wrong, something off about her. "When did you get married?" I said. My voice hardly got out of my mouth. I was so soft-spoken. I honestly just wanted to leave. I was a shy kid, and I never liked strangers, especially the kind that reeked. "I'm not a stranger. I'm his wife," she said, tilting her head to the side as she stared me down. Her nose curled up as if she was offended by my presence. "I'm your auntie now. You'll get used to it." They never answered my question. Grabbing onto my arm with a sense of entitlement, she dragged me across the threshold. Her breath was startlingly close, and it smelled like rotten fish. "I'm so happy to be a part of this family. Let's get to know one another." Her nails dug into my skin. It was more of a demand than a request. She asked me the mundane things, like what I liked to do at school and what my favorite subjects were. Then she talked about hobbies and such. The three of us sat around playing board games and cards and baking brownies. I was distracted the entire time because she was drinking wine straight out of the bottle, and she kept burping every 5 minutes or so. Not the soft, polite kind that you try to hide. Nope. She just let out some real belches. She drank the entire bottle of wine over the course of the afternoon, and got a little rough with me when I beat her at Go Fish. She tackled me onto the floor and ruffled my hair, and had this loud, cackling laugh that made my head ache. I wanted to leave. Uncle Todd just laughed. Isn't she a gem?" he said, twirling his wedding band around his finger. I couldn't help but wonder how much that cost him. He didn't have much of an income anymore. I needed a break from it all, so I excused myself to the bathroom. When Uncle Todd had been living alone, it wasn't clean by any means, but the bathroom was decent enough. I could do my business without puking, is what I mean to say. Not so much with Auntie Allison. The mirror had cracked, split right in half down the middle. There was no towels or soap or even a cloth to wash my hands on. The toilet already had chunks of shit floating in it, and when I tried to flush, it just came right back up. There was also the faint smell of lavender mixed in along with it all, as if she tried, as if she'd came in and tried to spray it with Febreze to hide the scent. It was safe to say that that didn't work at all. There were also clumps of hair in the sink, like a big, big ball of wet hair. It was just floating there in the sink that wouldn't drain. Your toilet wouldn't flush, I told them upon my return. They just shrugged at me and went back to playing goldfish. My father was 30 minutes late that day. "Oh, good, you're finally here," Uncle Todd said. My father was standing at the door with his hands in his pockets, waiting for me to bound up as quickly as humanly possible like I usually do. I was always excited to leave. This time, more so. "You never said Uncle Todd was married now," I muttered as I was putting on my shoes. "Yeah, I would just love for you to meet Allison," my uncle exclaimed. "Hey, since you're late, why don't you stay for a little while and eat with us?" Aunt Allison gave my dad a bright smile, but he wasn't looking at her. He was staring right at my Uncle Todd, with a very confused look on his face. "I make an amazing mac and cheese," Auntie Allison said. My father had no reaction. Uncle Todd put an arm around his wife and stood side to side like he had earlier with me. "I've been meaning to tell you. We eloped last week. I know this is kind of weird." "Jesus, how much pot have you been smoking around my daughter?" said my dad. His eyes gazed down to the empty wine bottles. "And booze, too? I thought you were going sober." "What's wrong with you? You could at least attempt to be civil," Uncle Todd said. His hand fell from my aunt's back, and I noticed his hands were shaking. "Are you all right?" I asked, but he couldn't hear me over the sound of my father's voice rising. "I thought that you had gotten all of your issues taken care of." He bulldozed past my uncle, reaching for the wine glass. Uncle Todd remained in his place, paralyzed and shaking. "Uncle Todd? Are you all right?" I said again, but my words didn't seem to reach him. I looked back at Auntie Allison. Her eyes had zeroed in on my father, who had gone into the living room and picked up the empty wine bottle. There were also around a dozen beer bottles left on the counter, and dirty dishes piling everywhere in the apartment. It wasn't a good look. "I've left my daughter with you multiple times. I thought you were starting to gain responsibility," my dad said. My uncle's body started to tremble. "Look what you've done to him," Auntie Allison spoke from behind me. That guttural voice caught her in her throat. She was angry. Her voice flushed with bright red. So much so that I thought she was going to burst. Those eyes looked like they had a target on my father's face. You could taste her need for revenge. "Your family is a disgrace." She wasn't making any sense. I was standing in front of her, and I could feel her arm tighten on my shoulder. My father, however, was only focused on Uncle Todd, who no longer just had a shaking hand. His entire body was trembling. "We need to get you to the hospital," said my father. No! My uncle's head rocked back and forth. "I'm not going fucking anywhere with... not leaving my wife. You can't make me. You can't make..." A violent seizure took a hold of him. Auntie Allison's black nails still dug into my shoulder so I couldn't move. "He'll be all right," she whispered into my ear. "This happens often." He did end up being fine. The hospital checked him out, and they didn't deem there would be anything wrong with him. Not physically, not mentally. The problem was her. Auntie Allison was haunting him. For the next couple of weeks, my father, my mother, and I went to visit him in his apartment to check and see how he was doing. Neither of them wanted to see him put in an institution. I came along because I thought I could help. After all, I was the only other one than Todd that could see Auntie Allison. I was always so sad to see the disappointment on her face when she stuck out her hand and tried to introduce herself to my parents. They always looked past her, and her eyes would darken. Uncle Todd always got very irritated and drowned himself in another swing from his whiskey. He wasn't supposed to have it, but I think Auntie Allison found a way to supply him with his kryptonite. "Put down the bottle," my dad said on one of these occasions. He took the liquor from him and putting back on the shelving unit. "It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, for God's sake. You knew we were coming over here. Can you be sober for just one day?" My uncle twirled the wedding band around his finger. Turns out he'd bought it for himself. You don't understand what it's like," Uncle Todd said, tears brimming in his eyes. "Everyone can see your soulmate." That was the thing about Allison. She wasn't just an illusion. She was painfully, utterly real. It wasn't just that I could see her. I could smell her, and I could touch her too. She was tangible to both of us, even if she wasn't to them. I couldn't say anything about it, though. I regret it now, not sticking up for my uncle. But I didn't want my parents thinking that there was anything wrong with me. Allison cooked some dinner for you," he mumbled to himself, still twirling that ring. "It's in the fridge." My father grumbled. "We already ate, Todd." I saw Allison's jaw clenched. She hated my father. I used to wonder if she would attack him. Just the dead, soulless look in her eyes made me think it. But that was the thing about Allison. She was never after him. She only had her eyes fixated on my uncle, and my uncle alone. For all I knew, she'd been around for years. It was only now that they'd lived together. I knew one day she'd kill him, but I hadn't expected to be there when it happened. It was the one day I was left alone with him. Just me, him, and Allison. I think my father had left us there to go buy Uncle Todd some food around the corner store and stock up the fridge with something to eat. We were sitting awkwardly in the living room, and I kept tapping my fingers on my knees. It was the first time I had been alone with him since the first time that I met my aunt. I had never dared to face her before, but I had to know what she was. "Who are you?" I said to her, finally breaking through the silence. "Or what are you? How come nobody can see you? Are you dead or something?" Auntie Allison was playing with her nose ring. "Do I look fucking dead to you?" I looked at my uncle. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "You understand why I have to do it," he said. He was looking at the floor. "Do what?" I said. "I'm a nuisance to everyone," he said. "You don't belong to this world," Auntie Allison agreed. "None of us do." I looked back at Allison, but her eye sockets were empty. I was frozen in my chair. "I'm a freak," said Allison, "and Todd's a freak, and you are a freak." I watched Uncle Todd twist the band around his finger again. "At least I know I'm not crazy like they say I am," said Uncle Todd, "because you see her too." "What's going on? What are you talking about?" I said. "I'm so confused." Uncle Todd took out a knife from in between the cushions. "I've been meaning to die for a long time," Uncle Todd said. He handed the knife over to Auntie Allison. "There is nothing but suffering in this world for people like us. What is life if you cannot love the person you were meant to love?" You're scaring me," I said. My knees were trembling, but I didn't want to move from my place. I was afraid Auntie Allison would attack me. I watched her move back towards him. She stroked my uncle's receding hair. "Someday you will understand why we need to do this," she said. "This is something that you have to see, so that when you meet your dead soulmate, you will have the courage to be with them too." "This is what I wanted," my uncle said. "Remember that." Auntie Allison gripped the knife and slid it across his throat. I screamed. Auntie Allison's body vanished completely, and Uncle Todd's fell to the floor. I crawled over to him and watched the blood splurt from his neck. My parents found me crying in the corner of the bathroom 10 minutes after that. Soulmates. I've hated the word ever since. What does that mean, to have a soulmate? I know now what it means to have a soulmate that has already died. And I know now what that means for me. There was a reason I could see Auntie Allison, and it was because somewhere out there's a dead soul still trapped in this world, waiting for me to join them. I don't want that future. I want to be happy with a living, breathing human. Someone that I could grow a life with, not someone that I have to die for. But I don't know if I have a choice. I don't think Uncle